The ambulance doors opened with a sharp metallic sound, cutting through the quiet evening outside the hospital. The sky had already turned dim, a soft gray fading into night, and the parking lights reflected off the wet pavement. Two paramedics stepped out quickly, their movements careful but urgent. Between them lay a man on a stretcher, completely still, his body strapped in place. He wore no expression, no sign of awareness, as if the world around him had simply slipped away. Right behind them, just a step slower but just as focused, walked a large canine. The dog's fur was dusty and slightly matted, its chest rising and falling in steady breaths. Its eyes, sharp and alert, never left the man on the stretcher. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. It just followed, close enough that no one could ignore its presence. Inside the emergency entrance, the automatic doors slid open. Bright white lights flooded over them, replacing the fading daylight. A few nurses at the front desk looked up immediately. One of them froze for a second, noticing the dog before anything else. "Is that a canine?" she whispered under her breath. No one answered right away. The paramedics moved quickly, guiding the stretcher inside. One of them spoke as they passed the desk, his voice low but steady. "Special unit. He stays with him." The nurse blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "He stays with the patient?" But they were already moving down the hallway, and she didn't have time to question it further. The wheels of the stretcher rolled over the smooth floor, echoing softly through the corridor. The man on it remained motionless, his face pale but calm. There were no visible injuries, no obvious reason for his condition. Just silence, as if something deep inside him had shut down. The dog stayed close, its body moving in quiet rhythm beside the stretcher. Occasionally, it would glance up at the man's face, as if checking for something that hadn't changed since they arrived. As they reached the emergency room, more staff gathered. A doctor stepped forward, already pulling on gloves. His eyes quickly moved from the patient to the dog, then back again. "We need space," he said firmly. "Let's move him onto the bed." The paramedics nodded, but as they reached to transfer the man, the dog shifted slightly. It didn't make a sound, but its posture changed. His body lowered just a little, its stance more grounded, more protective. The movement was small, but everyone noticed. "Is it safe?" one of the nurses asked quietly. "He's trained," one paramedic replied. "But he doesn't leave him." The doctor hesitated for a brief moment, then nodded. "Fine. Just be careful." They worked slowly, carefully moving the man from the stretcher to the hospital bed. The dog stayed close, stepping aside just enough to allow them space, but never breaking its focus. Its eyes followed every hand, every movement, as if memorizing it all. Once the patient was settled, machines were brought in. Soft beeping sounds filled the room as monitors were connected. A nurse adjusted a line, another checked his pulse. The doctor leaned in, watching closely. "Vitals are stable," he said after a moment, his voice quieter now. "But he's not responding." "Any idea what happened?" a nurse asked. The paramedic shook his head. "We weren't given details, just told to bring him in fast." The room fell into a strange kind of silence. Not empty, but heavy. Everyone was doing their job, but there was a quiet tension in the air, something unspoken. Near the foot of the bed, the dog sat down slowly. Its posture was calm, but its eyes never softened. Kept watching, always watching. One of the younger nurses took a cautious step closer. She crouched slightly, her hand hovering in the air for a second before she spoke. "Hey there," she said gently. The dog turned its head toward her. Not aggressive, not afraid, just aware. She paused, unsure if she should go any closer. "It's okay," the paramedic said quietly. "Just don't try to move him away." She nodded, lowering her hand. "I won't." Still, she couldn't stop looking at the dog. There was something unusual about it. Not just its training, but the way it carried itself. It wasn't restless or anxious like most animals in unfamiliar places. It was steady, focused, as if it had one purpose and nothing else mattered. Minutes turned into nearly an hour. The room remained active, but the situation didn't change. The man on the bed stayed unresponsive, his breathing even, his body still. A few more staff members came and went, each one reacting the same way when they saw the dog. Quiet surprise, careful movements, curious glances. "Shouldn't we move it?" One of them whispered to the doctor. The doctor glanced at the dog, then back at the patient. "Not unless we have to. But it's been almost an hour." "I know," he replied. "And it hasn't caused any trouble." The truth was, no one wanted to be the one to force the dog away. There was something about it that made people hesitate. Not fear exactly, but respect. Like it had a reason for being there, even if no one fully understood it. Outside the room, the hallway had grown quieter. The evening shift had settled in, and the usual rush had slowed. But inside, time seemed to move differently. At some point, a clock on the wall caught a nurse's attention. She looked at it, then back at the patient. "Has it really been this long?" she murmured. Another nurse checked her watch. "Almost 2 hours now. And the dog hasn't moved?" "Not really." They both glanced toward the corner of the room. The K9 was still there, sitting in the same spot, its gaze steady. Every now and then it would stand, walk a few steps closer to the bed, then sit again. Always near, always watching. It didn't eat. It didn't drink. It didn't lie down fully. It just stayed. As more time passed, the mood in the room began to shift. What started as curiosity slowly turned into something heavier. The stillness of the patient, the quiet presence of the dog. It all felt connected in a way that no one could explain. Another doctor came in to check on the case. He reviewed the monitors, asked a few questions, then looked at the dog. "It's been here the whole time?" he asked. "Yes," someone replied. He nodded slowly. "That's unusual." He didn't say anything else, but his expression lingered on the dog for a moment longer. By the time the 3rd hour passed, even the most experienced staff members were beginning to feel it. Not panic, not confusion, but a quiet sense that something about this situation wasn't ordinary. The dog remained unchanged. Its ears would twitch at certain sounds. Its eyes would follow certain movements, but it never lost focus on the man in the bed. Once, a nurse tried to adjust the patient's position slightly. As she stepped closer, the dog stood up again. Not threatening but firm, present. "I'm just helping," she whispered, almost instinctively. The dog watched her carefully, then, after a moment, allowed her to continue. It was as if it understood more than it should. As the 4th hour approached, the room had grown quieter again. Some staff rotated out, others stepped in, but the story remained the same. A silent patient, a loyal K9, and a growing sense of mystery. One nurse, older than the rest, stood near the doorway for a while, simply observing. She had seen many cases in her years, many unusual situations. But this felt different. She watched the dog for a long moment, then said softly, "It's waiting." "For what?" someone asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the dog. "I don't know," she finally said. "But it's not leaving until it happens." The words lingered in the air. No one argued. No one laughed. Because deep down they all felt it too. By the time the 5th hour passed, the hospital lights felt harsher, the room quieter. Even the small beeping sounds seemed louder now. The dog was still there, still watching, still waiting, and no one could shake the feeling that whatever it was waiting for hadn't arrived yet. The quiet in the room did not break when the 6th hour began. It only settled deeper, like something heavy that no one could move. The man on the bed remained still, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. The machines continued their soft beeping, steady and unchanged. And near the foot of the bed, the K9 remained in place, its eyes fixed, its body calm but alert. By now, word had spread beyond the emergency room. Staff from other departments had heard about the unusual case. The silent soldier, the dog that refused to leave, the long hours that had passed with no real change. A few people stopped by the doorway just to take a look, careful not to step inside unless they had a reason. Most of them reacted the same way. They would glance at the man, then at the dog, and something in their expression would shift. Curiosity would turn into quiet respect. Questions would remain unspoken. Inside the room, the main team had grown used to the presence of the canine, but that didn't mean they understood it. Every attempt to continue normal procedures came with hesitation. Every movement near the patient felt like it needed permission, even if no one said it out loud. "We need to adjust his position again," one nurse said softly, looking toward the doctor. The doctor nodded, but his eyes moved to the dog. "Let's do it slowly." Two nurses stepped closer to the bed. Their movements were careful, almost rehearsed. One reached toward the patient's shoulder, the other toward his arm. The moment their hands got close, the canine stood up. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. But the change was immediate. Its body became still in a different way, more focused, more present. Its ears lifted slightly, and its gaze sharpened. It stepped forward just enough to make its presence known. "I think we should pause," one of the nurses whispered. The doctor exhaled quietly. "We can't keep delaying everything." But it's reacting again. The room went still for a moment. Everyone looked at the dog, then back at each other. "It's not aggressive," another nurse said. "It's just watching us." "Watching, yes," the doctor replied. "But it's also stopping us." They waited a few seconds longer, then tried again. This time they spoke softly as they moved. "It's okay," one of them murmured. "We're just helping him." The dog didn't move this time, but it didn't relax either. Its eyes followed every hand, every small shift in position. It stood close enough that they could feel its presence, like a quiet line they shouldn't cross. They managed to adjust the patient slightly, then stepped back. The dog returned to its spot near the foot of the bed, sitting down again as if nothing had happened. But the message was clear. It would allow care, but only on its terms. After that, the room felt different again. Not tense exactly, but more careful. As if everyone had agreed, without speaking, to respect whatever boundary the dog had created. A little while later, a younger staff member stepped into the room. She had been on duty for a few hours but hadn't come near this case yet. She stood near the doorway at first, watching quietly. She looked younger than most of the others, her posture slightly unsure, her eyes observant. There was a hesitation in the way she held herself, like she was still finding her place in the busy rhythm of the hospital. "Are you assigned here?" one of the nurses asked her. She shook her head lightly. "No, I just heard about it." The nurse nodded. "Everyone has." The younger nurse didn't move closer right away. She stayed near the door, her gaze moving between the patient and the canine. Unlike the others, she didn't seem startled by the dog. Instead, she studied it, her expression thoughtful. "There's something strange about this," she said quietly. The older nurse nearby gave a small, knowing nod. "You're not the first to say that." "It's not just the dog," the younger one added. "It's the way it's behaving." "How do you mean?" She hesitated for a second, as if trying to find the right words. "It's not reacting out of fear or confusion. It's waiting, like it's expecting something." The older nurse looked at her more closely now. "We've been saying something similar." The younger nurse nodded slowly. "Yeah, but it's more than that." She took a small step forward. Across the room, the canine noticed immediately. Its head turned toward her, its eyes locking onto her movement. For a brief moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. The younger nurse stopped walking. She didn't step back, but she didn't move forward either. She simply stood there, meeting the dog's gaze. The room went quiet again. "Maybe don't get too close," someone said gently, but she didn't look away. "I'm not trying to," she replied softly. There was no fear in her voice, only a quiet curiosity. The dog continued to watch her. His body remained still, but its focus had shifted now. Completely. After a few seconds, the younger nurse slowly lowered her gaze. Not in submission, but in calm. Then she looked back at the patient. There was something in her expression that changed, just slightly. Something thoughtful. Something deeper than simple curiosity. "Has he shown any response at all?" she asked. "No," the doctor answered. Nothing. Not even small changes? Vitals are steady. That's it. She nodded, her eyes still on the patient. And the dog's been like this the whole time? Yes. She took another small step forward. Again, the dog reacted not by moving but by watching more closely. The younger nurse noticed this, but she didn't stop. Her steps were slow, careful, almost measured. I think I understand something, she said quietly. The others exchanged glances. Understand what? The doctor asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved just a little closer, stopping a few feet away from the bed. The dog remained where it was, but its attention was completely fixed on her now. It's not guarding him from us, she finally said. The room stayed silent. It's guarding him for something, she continued. Or for someone. The words hung in the air. No one dismissed them, because somehow they didn't sound wrong. The younger nurse stood there for a moment longer, her eyes moving between the patient and the K9. There was a strange feeling building inside her now. Not fear, not confusion, but recognition. A quiet sense that she had seen something like this before, or at least heard about it. She couldn't explain it, but it was there, and it was growing stronger. I know this sounds strange, she said softly, but I feel like it's waiting for the right person to come closer. And you think that's you? The doctor asked, not unkindly. She hesitated. I don't know, she admitted, but I think I should try. The room shifted again. A few people looked uncertain. Others simply watched. You're new here, one nurse said gently. Maybe we should. I'll be careful, the younger nurse said, her voice calm. She took another step forward. The dog didn't move, but its eyes followed her every second. Another step. Still nothing. The tension in the room tightened. Quiet but real. She was closer now. Close enough to see the details of the patient's face. Close enough to feel the weight of the moment. She stopped again. The dog remained still, watching. The younger nurse slowly exhaled. I don't think it sees me as a threat, she said quietly. No one responded, because they were all watching the same thing, waiting for what would happen next. And for the first time in 6 hours, it felt like something might actually change. The room felt smaller now, even though nothing had changed. The lights were the same, the machines kept their steady rhythm, and the patient lay exactly as before. But something in the air had shifted the moment the young nurse stepped closer. She stood just a few feet from the bed, her hands relaxed at her sides. She didn't rush. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes moved from the man's face to the K9 and back again, as if she were trying to understand something no one else could see. The dog had not moved from its place, but its attention was fully on her now. Its ears were slightly raised, and its gaze followed even the smallest movement she made. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't welcoming either. It was measuring. Behind her, the rest of the staff remained still. No one wanted to interrupt. Even the doctor, who had been giving quiet instructions all evening, had gone silent. The nurse took a slow breath. It's okay, she said softly, though it wasn't clear who she was speaking to. The dog, the patient, or maybe even herself. She shifted her weight slightly and took one more step forward. The reaction was immediate. The K9 stood up. Not sharply, not aggressively, but with purpose. His body straightened, its stance firm. It didn't growl or bark, but there was no mistaking the message. This was a line, and she had just reached it. The nurse stopped at once. She didn't step back. She didn't freeze. She simply paused, her eyes lifting to meet the dog's. For a few seconds, nothing moved. The room held its breath. Then, very slowly, she lowered her gaze again. Not in fear, but in calm acknowledgement. Her posture remained relaxed, her shoulders steady. I understand, she whispered. The words were quiet, almost lost in the hum of the machines. But something about them felt deliberate. The dog didn't sit back down. It stayed standing, watching her carefully. She stayed where she was, giving it space. Time passed like that, silent, stretched thin. No one behind her dared to speak. Then, after what felt longer than it was, the nurse did something small but unexpected. She slowly raised her right hand. Not toward the dog. Not toward the patient. Just up near her chest. At first, it seemed like a meaningless movement. But then she gently pulled back the sleeve of her uniform. The fabric shifted, revealing a small part of her wrist. There, just above the line where her sleeve had been, was a tattoo. It wasn't large or flashy. It was simple, clean. A symbol, carefully inked, with sharp lines and quiet meaning. No one in the room recognized it, but the dog did. The change was immediate. The canine's posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. Its ears lowered slightly, its head tilting just a fraction. The sharp focus in its eyes softened, replaced by something else. Recognition. The nurse didn't move any closer yet. She kept her hand where it was, the tattoo visible, her expression calm. "It's okay," she said again, her voice steady. "You know this." The words seemed strange to everyone else. But the dog responded. Slowly, it took a single step forward. The room tensed again, unsure what this meant. But the dog didn't approach in a threatening way. Its movement was careful, almost hesitant. It lowered its head slightly, its gaze still fixed on the tattoo. The nurse held still. "You remember," she whispered. Another step. Now the dog was closer to her than it had been to anyone else in the room. The staff exchanged glances, confusion and disbelief passing silently between them. "What is happening?" someone murmured under their breath. No one answered, because they were all watching the same thing unfold. The dog stopped just a short distance from the nurse. His body was no longer rigid. The stance had changed completely. It was no longer guarding in the same way. It was listening. The nurse slowly lowered her hand, but didn't hide the tattoo. She let it remain visible as she took a small step forward. This time, the dog didn't block her. It didn't step back either. It simply stayed where it was. The nurse moved closer to the bed. One step, then another. The distance between her and the patient closed, and for the first time since he had arrived, someone new stood at his side without resistance. The dog turned slightly, shifting its position so it was no longer between her and the bed. The change was subtle, but it meant everything. A quiet wave of disbelief moved through the room. She's actually beside him," one nurse whispered. The doctor didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the scene. The young nurse stood beside the patient now, her gaze soft as she looked down at him. Up close, his stillness felt heavier. His face, calm but distant, carried a quiet weight. There was no sign of awareness, no response to the world around him. But the nurse didn't seem discouraged. She reached out slowly, her hand hovering just above his arm. The dog watched closely. Everyone did. Her fingers gently touched the fabric of his sleeve. Nothing happened at first, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly closer and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You're not alone," she said. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper. The room remained silent, waiting. The dog lowered itself to the ground again, this time not at the foot of the bed, but closer to where she stood. Its posture was calm now, no longer tense. Trust had replaced resistance, and no one could explain why. The nurse kept her hand resting lightly on the patient's arm. Her other hand moved slightly, adjusting her sleeve again so the tattoo remained visible. She didn't look at the others. She stayed focused on the man in the bed. "I know you can hear something," she murmured, "even if it's far away." The machines continued their steady rhythm. No change, but the feeling in the room had shifted. The doctor took a small step forward, careful not to disturb the moment. "What did you show the dog?" he asked quietly. The nurse didn't look up. "It's not just a symbol," she said softly. "It means something to them." "To who?" he asked. She hesitated. Then she finally glanced at him. "To the kind of unit he belongs to." The doctor frowned slightly. "You recognize it?" She nodded once. "I've seen it before." That answer only created more questions. But no one pressed further, because something else was happening. The patient's breathing, which had been steady and unchanged for hours, seemed to shift, just slightly. It was subtle, so subtle that it could have been missed. But the nurse noticed. Her eyes sharpened just a little. "You see that?" she whispered. The doctor stepped closer, watching the monitor. "It's a small variation," he said. "Very small. But it's there," she replied. The dog lifted its head again, its gaze moving between the nurse and the patient. The room held still. For the first time since the man had arrived, there was a sign, however small, that something inside him was responding. The nurse didn't move her hand. She stayed exactly where she was. "Stay with me," she said softly. No one knew if he could hear her. No one knew if it meant anything. But no one could deny that something had changed. And standing there, with a quiet tattoo revealed and a calm voice steady in the silence, the young nurse had done something no one else could. She had been allowed in. And now, everything felt like it was about to unfold. The room stayed unusually quiet after the nurse spoke. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty. It was the kind that felt full, like everyone was holding the same thought but afraid to disturb it. The machines kept their steady rhythm, but even they seemed less important now. The young nurse remained beside the bed, her hand still resting lightly near the patient's arm. She didn't press. She didn't try to force anything. She simply stayed close, as if her presence alone mattered more than any procedure. The K9 had settled again, but not in the same position as before. It now lay slightly closer to the nurse than to the foot of the bed. Its body was relaxed, but its eyes were still alert, moving slowly between her face and the man on the bed. Something had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The doctor stood a few steps behind, watching carefully. He had seen strange cases before, situations that didn't fit neatly into explanations. But this one felt different. It wasn't just medical. It wasn't just emotional. It was something layered, something unspoken. He glanced at the monitor again. The readings were still stable. No major change. But there were small variations now. Subtle movements that hadn't been there before. The nurse noticed them too. "His breathing is changing slightly," she said softly, without turning her head. "Yes," the doctor replied. "Very slight. But it's different from before," she added. He nodded once. "It is." The dog lifted its head a little higher at the sound of their voices, then lowered it again, as if it understood the importance of staying calm. The nurse leaned in slightly closer to the patient. "You're still here," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but gentle. Not commanding, not demanding, just present. A few seconds passed. Nothing happened, but she didn't move away. Instead, she slowly adjusted her stance, standing more firmly beside the bed. Her eyes stayed focused on the patient's face, studying it carefully, not with fear or urgency, but with patience. The room behind her remained still. No one interrupted. Then something unexpected happened. The K9 slowly got up again. But this time it didn't step forward or block her path. It walked around the foot of the bed. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. It circled once, then stopped on the other side, closer to the nurse than before. It wasn't guarding in the same way anymore. It was positioning itself, like it was aligning with her. The nurse noticed, but she didn't react with surprise. She simply watched it for a moment, then returned her attention to the patient. "You trust me now," she said quietly, almost as a statement rather than a question. The dog didn't respond in any obvious way, but it didn't move away either. The doctor stepped closer again, now unable to hide his curiosity. "How do you know it recognizes you?" he asked gently. The nurse paused for a moment before answering. "It's not just recognition," she said. "It's understanding." He frowned slightly. "Understanding what?" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "What it was trained for," she said finally. The doctor looked at her, trying to interpret her meaning. But before he could ask more, the monitor beside the bed gave a soft change in tone. A small shift in rhythm. Everyone turned at once. The nurse leaned in immediately. "His heart rate changed," she said. The doctor checked the screen. "It increased slightly," he confirmed. The room felt tighter now, as if the air itself had changed. The nurse didn't move her hand away from the bed. Instead, she placed it more firmly, not gripping, just resting it with intention. "It's okay," she said again, her voice calm. "You don't have to stay away." The dog lifted its head at her words. Then slowly it moved closer. This time no one stopped it. No one questioned it. It came to a stop beside her, close enough that their presence formed a kind of triangle around the patient. Dog, nurse, and still body in the center. The nurse looked down at the patient again. Something in her expression changed. Not fear, not sadness, but recognition of something deeper. "I think he's coming back," she whispered. The doctor looked at the monitor again. "There are signs," he admitted. "Small neurological responses." That was enough to make the room shift again. A few nurses stepped closer, careful not to interrupt the moment, but unable to stay away. The canine remained still beside the bed, its head slightly lowered now. His focus was no longer defensive. It was attentive. The nurse leaned closer to the patient's ear. "You're not in that place anymore," she said softly. "You're here." Her voice was steady, but there was something emotional underneath it, something she wasn't fully showing. The dog made a small movement then. It shifted its weight, then gently placed its head closer to the edge of the bed, as if acknowledging her words. The room stayed silent again. Then, almost imperceptibly, the patient's fingers moved. It was small, barely noticeable, but the nurse saw it. Her breath caught slightly. "Did you see that?" she asked quickly. "Yes," the doctor said immediately. The movement didn't repeat, but it had been real. The nurse didn't take her hand away. Instead, she leaned in just a little more. "Good," she said softly. "That's good." The canine let out a slow breath, almost like a release of tension it had been holding for hours. The change was subtle, but the atmosphere in the room softened. It was no longer the same heavy weighting it had been before. Now it felt like something was opening. The doctor stepped forward carefully, checking the patient's reflexes. He tested a response, watching closely. There was a faint reaction. Not strong, but present. "He's not fully awake," the doctor said. "But there's activity." The nurse nodded. "He can hear." The doctor looked at her. "You can't be certain." She didn't argue. She simply repeated softly, "He can hear." The dog remained close, its eyes moving slowly between the nurse and the patient. Then something else happened. The nurse gently adjusted the patient's hand, positioning it slightly more comfortably. As she did, she spoke again, but this time her tone was different, carried something personal. "You don't have to fight it alone," she said. At that moment, the monitor showed another small change. A slight increase in responsiveness. The doctor leaned in closer. "This is consistent," he said. "It's not random." The nurse stayed calm, but her eyes softened. She looked down at the tattoo on her wrist again for a brief moment, then back at the patient. The dog noticed her movement. It lifted its head slightly, as if reacting to the same memory she was carrying. There was something unspoken between them now. Not words, not commands. Something quieter. The nurse spoke again. "You did what you had to do," she said softly. "But you're not there anymore." The room behind her stayed still. The canine slowly lowered itself into a resting position again, but this time it stayed close to her side. It was no longer guarding. It was staying. The doctor stepped back slightly, looking at the entire scene with growing disbelief. "This is not something I've seen before," he admitted quietly. "No," one of the nurses said. "None of us have." The patient's breathing remained steady, but now there were slight variations. Signs of internal response. The nurse didn't move away. She stayed exactly where she was. The dog stayed with her. And for the first time since the man had arrived, the room no longer felt like it was waiting for something unknown. Felt like it had already begun. The room no longer felt like it was frozen in time. Something had shifted so deeply that even the quiet sounds of machines seemed different now. The steady beeping was still there, but it no longer carried the same tension. Instead, it blended into a calmer rhythm, almost like the room itself was beginning to breathe again. The young nurse remained beside the bed, her presence steady and unbroken. She did not rush. She did not overwhelm the situation. She simply stayed close, as if she had become part of the space itself. The K9 was still near her side, no longer standing guard in the same rigid way as before. Its posture was lower now, more relaxed, but its eyes were still alert. It wasn't watching the room in fear anymore. It was watching with understanding. The doctor stood a short distance away, arms folded loosely, trying to process everything he had witnessed. He had entered this case expecting something clinical, something explainable through medical logic. But what he was seeing now didn't fit into any simple explanation. The patient's condition had changed again, slowly but clearly. His breathing was no longer just stable. It had rhythm, variation, signs of awareness returning beneath the surface. His reflex responses are stronger now, the doctor said quietly, almost to himself. A nurse beside him nodded. It's consistent, not random anymore. The young nurse heard them, but she didn't turn around. Her focus remained on the patient. You're still here, she said softly again, as if continuing a conversation that had already begun. The dog shifted slightly closer to her words, but did not interrupt. It seemed to understand the importance of silence. Minutes passed. Then something small but unmistakable happened. The patient's fingers moved again. This time it was not a single twitch. It was slower, more deliberate. A faint curl of movement, as if his body was slowly reconnecting with awareness. The young nurse leaned in immediately, her voice calm but steady. You're safe, she said. You're not there anymore. The monitor responded with a slight change in rhythm. The doctor stepped forward quickly, eyes locked on the screen. There's improvement, he said. Neurological response is increasing. No one spoke for a moment after that. It was as if they were afraid that words might break whatever fragile progress was happening. The K9 lifted its head slightly, watching the patient more closely now. Its ears twitched once, then settled again. The young nurse gently adjusted the patient's hand again, making sure he was comfortable. Her movements were careful, respectful. You've been holding on long enough, she whispered. It's okay to come back now. The room stayed still. Then, after a few seconds that felt much longer, the patient's eyelids fluttered. It was brief, almost uncertain, but it was real. A few of the staff gasped quietly, unable to stop their reaction. The doctor stepped closer. That's a response, he said firmly. That's conscious movement. The young nurse didn't react with surprise. Instead, her expression softened slightly, as if she had expected this moment in some quiet way. Good, she said gently. That's good. The K9 shifted again, but this time it did not stand. It remained seated, its posture calm. Its attention was fully on the patient now, no longer divided between guarding and reacting. The atmosphere in the room changed again, but this time it was different from before. It was not tension. It was anticipation mixed with relief. The patient's breathing grew slightly stronger. The movements in his fingers became more consistent. The doctor checked the monitor again, then looked at the others. He's stabilizing further, he confirmed. We may be seeing the beginning of full return of consciousness. The words hung in the air for a moment. Full return of consciousness. It felt like something too large to say lightly. The young nurse stayed close, her voice soft but steady. You can open your eyes when you're ready, she said. The K9 made a small sound then. Not a bark, not a whine, just a low, quiet exhale. It was the first time it had made any audible reaction in hours. The patient's eyelids fluttered again. This time they stayed slightly open longer than before. A weak but visible attempt. The room reacted immediately. He's waking, one of the nurses whispered. Slowly, the doctor said. But yes. The young nurse leaned in just slightly. Take your time, she said softly. No need to rush. The patient's eyes did not fully open yet, but there was movement beneath the lids. Awareness trying to surface. The K9 shifted its position closer, now almost sitting directly beside the nurse, its presence no longer defensive or uncertain. It felt grounded, as if it had finally reached the point it had been waiting for. The doctor watched everything carefully, still trying to remain clinical, but clearly affected by what he was seeing. "There's no external reason for this speed of recovery," he said quietly. "It's unusual." The young nurse didn't respond to that. Instead, she kept her attention on the patient. "You're not alone," she said again, her voice steady. "You're here with us." This time, the patient's eyes opened slightly more. Not fully focused, but open. A soft murmur went through the room. Someone stepped back instinctively, as if witnessing something too personal. The canine lowered its head slightly, staying close. The young nurse gently adjusted her position so she was directly within his line of sight. "That's it," she said. "Just stay with me." The patient's gaze shifted slightly. Not sharp, not fully awake, but aware enough to register presence. The doctor moved closer, checking responses. "He's tracking," he said. "Visual awareness is present." The young nurse nodded slightly but didn't look away from the patient. "Do you know where you are?" she asked softly. There was no immediate response, but the patient's breathing changed again. A slow, uneven rhythm that suggested effort. The canine lifted its head again, watching carefully. Then, after a moment that felt suspended in time, the patient's lips moved slightly. It was not a full word, not even a clear sound, but it was movement, intentional movement. The room held still. The young nurse leaned closer. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to force it." The patient's eyes opened a little wider. The doctor exhaled slowly. "He's coming back steadily." No one spoke after that, because what followed felt like something delicate. The patient remained in that halfway state, aware but not fully awake, present but still fragile. The canine stayed close, no longer reacting to every movement. It simply remained there, as if its purpose had been fulfilled and now it was allowed to rest. The young nurse finally straightened slightly, but did not step away. "You did it," she said quietly, though it was unclear whether she was speaking to the patient or acknowledging the journey itself. The patient's eyes remained partially open, his breathing steady. The doctor looked at the monitor one final time and then at the room. "He's stable," he said. "He's recovering." A quiet release moved through the staff. Not celebration, not excitement, something softer. Relief. The young nurse looked down at the tattoo on her wrist again briefly, then back at the patient. The K9 slowly shifted its position, sitting fully now beside her, no longer alert in the same way, but present. The room had changed completely from when it had begun hours ago. It was no longer about waiting for something unknown. It was about witnessing something return. The young nurse stayed where she was, still close to the patient, still steady. And as the hospital continued its quiet rhythm around them, one thing was clear. Whatever had held him back for so long had finally started to let go.